Good day. Today is April 22nd, 2026. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. I've got the usual crew here. Former Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
Senior Alberta columnist Cory Morgan.
Always a pleasure.
News editor Dave Naylor.
The pleasure is all his.
And coming to us from Lotus Land, special guest today, our BC reporter Alex Zoltan.
Pleasure as well.
All right. We're going to talk about Canada's new Foreign Legion. The Canadian Armed Forces is meeting or exceeding its recruitment targets by bringing in large numbers of foreigners. Should we be worried about arming people with a governing party that is known to use the power of the state to crush dissent? I don't know. We'll chat about it. We're going to chat about Doug Ford's gravy plane, the short-lived super luxury jet that Doug Ford purchased with Ontario taxpayers' dollars, met an unfortunate end with pretty predictable public outrage for the gravy plane. He's now going to sell it. It's been a total political disaster in Ontario, but Doug Ford's pretty good at sensing when things are unpopular and somehow living to fight another day. But we're going to start with David Eby's cluster muck. That's why we're bringing in our BC reporter, Alex Zoltan. Alex, why don't you give us just a really quick summary? I think most people have some idea about the disaster that's going on with DRIPA stuff in BC, but this has turned into a hourly evolving positions for David Eby and just a total political disaster.
Yeah, so a quick summary would be asking really kind of the impossible in some sense. This has been an ongoing thing for many, many years. DRIPA was passed unanimously in the House in 2019. It was a well-intentioned bill at the time, and nobody really thought much of it. But what it has caused is a state of paralysis in the economics of British Columbia. In order to understand DRIPA, you have to understand UNDRIP, which is this aspirational document from the UN. It was never intended to be a law. Essentially, what it is this promise that you would act in good faith while negotiating anything with Indigenous people. The BC government, in their infinite wisdom, decided to make it a law. And then they doubled down on that. Noting that it was an aspirational document, they decided that they wanted to give it teeth. So in 2021, they passed another law called the Interpretation Act. The Interpretation Act essentially instructed the government, and by extension the courts, to demand that DRIPA I should backtrack a little bit here. Any provincial statutes must be in alignment with DRIPA, which is essentially identical to UNDRIP. That has basically created a standstill in terms of many different things, including resource projects, pipelines, so on and so forth. And now David Eby, on April 1st, the recent history of UNDRIP started on April Fool's Day, funnily enough. And he said it was non-negotiable. They had to get rid of it because it's caused so many problems. He then backed down on that and he proposed a pause. He didn't have enough support even amongst his own caucus in order to get the pause passed. So then he went back to the drawing table, and on Sunday he decided that he had written legislation that was supposed to be produced on Monday. But later on Sunday evening, apparently the First Nations Leadership Council had threatened him with collective action. We don't really know what that means. And so he decided to scrap making any changes to DRIPA whatsoever for the spring session, and he's now kicking the can down the road to the fall session. That's a short version.
Yeah. Dave, it's been a busy week from last week into this week covering this, because it's been, Alex has had been filing sometimes stories on the hour as the BC government's position has changed. But David Eby is in a weird spot now. The legislation is self-evidently extremely economically destructive. You've got land titles threatening the property, Aboriginal land title challenges threatening the property title of people, can't get mortgages. You've got essentially total shutdown of new resource development projects with this DRIPA nonsense. to the point where David Eby, who has spent his entire career around this stuff, finally recognizes we simply cannot function as a society. We can't function as a government, as an economy. And then I don't know, the Chiefs made him an offer he couldn't refuse, or something. I don't,
or maybe a threat.
Yeah, collective action. Again, we don't know what the heck that really means. But I know, I think you read it. There was a great column from Vaughn Palmer, and I think in the Vancouver Sun or Times Colonist, one of the media papers there. The David Eby has kind of realized he's not really in charge of BC anymore.
No, he looks like a dead man walking. He looked almost gaunt at the press conference yesterday. The stress is certainly taking its toll on him, and yeah, he's paralyzed with, I don't know if it's fear or not, but you're quite right. I think he's realized that they've gone too far, but they can't figure out a way to get it back on track because of the the threats from the indigenous groups. So, somewhere along the line, he's either going to have to whatever that phrase is, or get off the toilet. So, yeah, he looks extremely weak at the moment.
He's in an impossible political position, Cory, I think, right now. It's exceedingly obvious that this needs to be next. It's possible he actually could have found, or his government is majority by a single seat. It's the narrowest of margins. It's possible that, he could have passed it with the support of the Conservatives. Because the Conservatives seem to be, at least most of them are on board for doing away with this nonsense. But it would mean the end of his premiership, because if he's relying on the Conservatives for a vote, and most of his own MLAs, maybe not all, but at least a very large number of his own MLAs vote against him, that would mean the end of him politically. And just literally moments before we came on in to record here, Alex in BC published a story that the Rose Caucus, which is kind of the radical socialist wing of the NDP nationally, is demanding the resignation of David Eby for being too soft on this stuff. Is the clock ticking on this guy now?
Yeah, he's done. He tried to play both sides, and he can't win. He's done something that not enough socialists hit fast enough, and that's a reality check. Their legislation is garbage. It's paralyzing the province. Unfortunately, he's leading the wrong ideological party to take the stance and say, we've gone too far with this race-based policy. We have to turn it back. They're terrified, all politicians, conservative ones are too, of the Indigenous lobby. And whatever those threats may be, it would be, maybe banging drums on the legislature steps or blocking roads or all sorts of things that upset Indigenous bands do when they feel their entitlements are being threatened. And he just doesn't have the backbone to stand up for it. Or he also doesn't have the caucus support to make that stance. He's in an impossible position. He's, as I said, dead man walking. We'll just see how long it is before he's pulled out of there.
I'm not sure what the way is out of this. It's clearly urgent. They must deal with it. They must deal with it immediately. Kicking the can down the road, it's major economic consequences for British Columbia. But he seems to be politically paralyzed in this. He probably could get it through the legislature, but it would be the end of his premiership then to have to rely on conservative votes and lose potentially a majority of his own caucus's votes in it. You don't get to survive something like that.
No, you don't. If he was a man who you could depend on to do the right thing, he'd say, all right, I wear it. I made a huge mistake here. I resign, and then somebody else who hasn't got the personal investment in it could come out and do a deal. But, Cory, we were talking about banging the drums on the legislature for green grass and so on. Yeah, that would probably happen, but there's a whole mess of things that could also happen, and I think that's what people are really concerned about. I just want to take you back a couple of years when we were building a pipeline out to the coast from the Dawson Creek area, carrying natural gas. They had tremendous problems. People interfering with the pipeline, breaking equipment, setting things on fire. A bunch of people got beat up, the workers on the site, and I have a sense that all these years when we have been saying, well, of course, it's nice to be here, but we recognize that we're on the traditional territory of the whatever. Finally, the whatever have said, yeah, you're right.
Sorry.
You are. So we'd like it back. And Mr. Eby thought that he was coasting that particular wave. And unfortunately, even if he didn't mean it, they did. And so this, my little solution that, yes, he can resign, it is the necessary first step. But the fellow who comes along after isn't going to have an easy ride of it.
Well, I'm not even sure the Conservatives are up to it. I mean, it's a diverse field, but and then there is a lot of talk about UNDRIP and DRIPA and the Conservative leadership race, but I'm not sure how far they're really actually willing to go. Alex, you're a reporter, but I want you to do your best job putting on you're using your crystal ball here. How does Eby get out of this? Is it simply kick the can down the road and just accept like kind of an economic collapse of resource development in BC? How does he get out of this one?
I think the concern is less about how Eby's political career survives this and more about how BC's economy survives it. Ultimately, DRIPA has to be repealed. I'm not a lawyer, but the key issue with DRIPA is this language that says that all Indigenous tribes have a right to free and informed consent on anything, whether that be, a resource project like a pipeline or many things that are less or more innocuous than that. And consent is a very nebulous term. It's very broad. It's very vague. It's not exactly clear. It's one of the reasons sexual assault conviction, the rate of convictions is very, very low, because the concept of consent is difficult to fully grasp. It very rarely do two people, or let alone two groups, agree completely on everything. Removing the sexual assault element, that's a minefield of its own. Take, for example, if you are invited to go to your mother-in-law's house for the weekend, does anybody truly consent to that? Well, it's debatable, because you may be pressured. And so this is the issue with DRIPA, right? And then you have another issue, which is that in BC, unlike other provinces, we did not fully form treaties. 95% of BC sits on what they call unceded territory. So even if you receive the consent of one tribe to put a pipeline through their land, another tribe may say that that land is on their overlapping territory. And so ultimately, David Eby's political career is a very small part of this. BC's entire economy is on the line. Eby's proposal to go ahead.
Okay, well, I mean, yes, but let's be realistic. David Eby's number one concern probably is his political career. Most politicians have a tendency to conflate what's good for the people with what's good for themselves. The people need me. I am the best guy. Therefore, if I go down, the people go down. So they tend to conflate one with the other. The obvious solution seems to be like there's a deadlock. They've got to deal with it. The obvious solution seems to be to resign. But I'm doubtful that he would see that as probably the best way out. How, short of resigning, how could you conceive that David Eby navigates his way through this one?
I think that David Eby, if we're remaining completely laser focused purely on his political career and his own self-interest, his best option was to simply put a pause on DRIPA until the next fixed election date, which was, it looked like that was going to be the avenue that he took, but it appears that he didn't have enough support amongst his own caucus for that. So I would say that his political career is pretty much dead in the water at this point. I would agree with you, gentlemen, on that.
Yeah, on the drip.
Oh, the slow drip.
I was thinking of a more classic.
Eby's got no drip. All right. Well, from one troubled premier to a guy. Actually, I can't say he's a troubled premier. Doug Ford. He's the Teflon premier. He survives anything because Ontario Conservatives are unfortunately pretty cowardly often when it comes to their leaders. They don't do anything about it. So, Dave, maybe just. I think most people are kind of broadly aware. Just give a real short summary of the saga of Doug Ford's gravy plane.
Doug Ford wants plane. Doug Ford gets plane. Doug Ford realizes he's made a major mistake. Doug Ford gives plane back, all without going for a single ride on it. But it's a
great summary.
Well, you said you wanted it quick.
Yeah,
so $29 million plane. The entire Conservative cabinet voted 100% that he should have one, and they went out and bought this thing from Bombardier. It's a beautiful plane. I mean, any premier would be proud of it, but he wasn't reading the temperature of the room very well when record lineups at food banks and inflation. I know you don't like that word, Derek, but rising prices. Hurting people, all over the place. People are squeezed. People are hurt. The optics just look bad. So Dave answering his cell phone, people yelling at him. He backtracked. He was very sulky and very, poor me. Prime Minister gets his jet. Why can't I have mine? I have a long way to fly in Ontario. Which he does. And to me, it shows Canada as a nation is a failure. He should have a jet. Of course he should have a jet. Because he's responsible for billions and billions of dollars, and his province is absolutely huge. It's little things like that. Canadians don't like to see their leaders have nice things. The other point I want to make is just look at 24 Sussex, right? The nation's prime minister should have a house that looks pretty good. That's where you host foreign leaders and bring them over for barbecues and stuff like that. Meanwhile, in Canada, we can't even agree on that, and 24 Sussex is falling to bits. I mean, come on. Our leaders need nice things.
So, I don't want to slag my former employer, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, but when I was there, I was the most guilty party of always going after a lot of these little things. I remember we went after Bev Oda's orange juice. There actually was an explanation for it. It was an outrageous cost for the orange juice, but there was actually a perfectly reasonable explanation for it. Sometimes shit just happens, and it is a really Canadian thing that we are overly nitpicky. Ontario is bigger. If someone correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's bigger than any European country other than Russia, and I don't consider Russia Europe. But it's a gigantic province. There is entire areas where there's not even a dirt road to it. And when my grandfather, he'd have to fly into middle of absolute nowhere for moose hunting. And even if there is road access, do we expect the premier to waste an entire day in travel to get around?
No, you charter a plane. You don't have to buy it.
There's enough travel between the premier and the cabinet to justify it. I think the problem was here, trying to be reasonable and balanced, and Dave got into this. It was a $30 million plane. We looked it up. I remember when the news was first breaking, I was like, I don't know. A plane seems reasonable. Let's look into what kind of plane it is. It was a luxury plane. Like, this is something that some sheik from Abu Dhabi could fly around in. This was creme de la creme. It was overkill. Not saying that the premier needs to go in a hang glider or a little Cessna or something. That I think could have been reasonable, but he went overboard. But at the same time, I think we do need to, Cory. I think we do have this problem in Canada. 24 Sussex is literally uninhabitable because people don't want to be seen as living high on the hog. We don't have to make it the White House, and we don't have to make it Air Force One. But at some point, I think Canadians can be overly curmudgeonly and penny pinching on this stuff for fear that officials are taking advantage of the system.
Well, maybe make the case before handing us the bill. I mean, it was poorly done too. Yeah. So if you start by saying this is a large geographic place, here's the list of the places we've had to travel to and the importance of it. Here's an emergency we had to go to quickly. So yeah, I didn't have time to get in a charter plane or a smaller one, but it was just kind of, well, I'm just dropping that on you. Here it is. Here's the $29 million one. Like, did you shop around? Did you check around? And we've seen some other examples where those things have been abused. Alison Redford was the prime case in Alberta. The plane, again, it's a large province. She's a premier. Maybe it's justified in getting people. She was using it to fly friends to Palm Springs. Yeah. And let's face it, how long would it have been before Doug took off to the Bahamas in that thing? He should have played better politics with it. There's some truth to it. That's a good point. Like with Sussex and so on. I mean, these are leaders. They do need resources. They need to put out an impression of, support and strength. But at the same time, you better be cognizant. and respectful of the people who pay the bills for all those things. And that didn't happen this time.
Well, you know, it may well be that if you were respectful of the people paying the bills and you charted all of the air charters that the government of Ontario does for various reasons, this thing would have been defensible as
Well, maybe not the $30 million luxury plane, but
well.
reasonable
It's the
plane.
luxury, you know, something that did the job.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, those
Something
Challenger
reasonable.
jets that the
Yeah.
Prime Minister flies around in, they're not luxury. They're
No.
actually rather uncomfortable, but they, you know, they do the job, and they're not any $29 million. So that probably was the thing. But I think I'm guessing here, and an enterprising reporter for the, you know, who wants to get quids in with Queen's Park, might just do a search for information, and I think the information would be very quickly supplied that would allow him to write a story saying that this would save the taxpayers millions of dollars in the air. And by the way, kit it out so it can do medevac, and then your hands are clean.
Well, and funny thing, this is coming at the same time as the Ontario government is trying to amend its freedom of information laws to exempt the cabinet from having to release information, and this would have been exempted. I mean, is it any coincidence? I mean, as I said, I think having a plane, maybe not this particular luxury model $300 million plane, but a plane would have been reasonable. But they don't want to answer for it. That's one reason the Ford government is radically overhauling its freedom of information laws. No government of any partisan stripe likes freedom of information when you're on the government benches. You love it when you're on the opposition benches because you can use it as a cudgel to beat your enemies over the head with, but no one likes it once you're on the government side. So I get that. But it goes, Alex, against just the very core brand of Doug Ford. I mean, he always rode on the coattails of his brother Rob Ford on this stuff, but they had this brand shared together. I think it was the no one can name her because she's a nobody, but the NDP leader of the opposition in Ontario, she called it the gravy plane, which played on. Remember, Rob Ford and Doug Ford talked about the gravy train on Toronto City Hall. You know, the gravy train. These guys are living on the benefit of the taxpayers. They've got all these wild perks that they're using, and so this stuck because everyone in Ontario knows the gravy train. This is the gravy plane. Doug Ford, you know, I mean, it is for the cameras, but people seem to like it. You know, he's out seen, you know, shoveling out someone's car that's stuck on the side of the road in a snowstorm. You know, he's Dougie, Premier Doug, and this just went. So this cut against this brand, but he backed down pretty fast. I think he survives this.
I would tend to agree. I think that optically speaking, it's also a bit inconvenient for Doug Ford in the sense that there was also the controversy over Donald Trump and the Qatari plane. And so anything that looks Trumpian is a bit of a disaster for any Canadian politician at all levels of government right now.
Yeah. And I've always thought the comparisons of Ford and Trump were pretty stupid. I guess they have a passing. I'm kind of ripping off of Matt Gurney at the line here. He had a good piece on this. Yeah, they have a passing resemblance. They're kind of bombastic guys with blonde hair. That's about where most of the comparisons end, except they both tend to also chicken out. You know, the meme Taco Trump always chickens out has become a thing in the States. You know, and Doug chickens out. You know, and he hits the least bit of controversy. He backs off. And I'm just conflicted on this one because it makes sense for the premier of a who governs a province the size of like half of Western Europe and that has obviously got much less transportation capacity than virtually anywhere in Europe. You should probably have a plane. And then he screws it up so badly by getting this luxury plane and then like not really telling anyone about it, doing it surreptitiously. The man's just got no spine, but he has an incredible political radar to realize when he's stepped in a pile of shit and getting himself out. All right. Nigel, let's talk about our brave new Foreign Legion. France has, you know, the famous Foreign Legion. It's a way to become a citizen. You know, it's got not the greatest reputation as the most compliant with the Geneva Conventions. You know, they tend to be a little rougher. But yeah, every military needs someone to do the dirty work, I guess, and these guys do it.
You'll notice that the French don't let them set up a barracks in
French soil.
Yeah.
They like to keep them out of metropolitan France, as they would call it.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons is you don't like the idea of foreign troops, even under your own flag, foreign troops on your own soil. The French like to have a revolution every few years, and it's important that if the revolution, if the government is going to fire on its citizens, it must be Frenchmen firing at other Frenchmen, that there's a sense of blood there, and that they'll be a bit more hesitant to shoot.
Well, it's compliant with their national anthem, actually, that calls upon, the peasants to rise up and let the blood flow. And I don't know the literal translation, but it's pretty gory. Anyway, you're onto something with that. Look, so here's the thing that this is actually a very sad story, because if you, like me, you're aware of the Canadian military contribution over the last 100 years, the kind of people who went out and did the job in the, well, take it back to the Boer War if you care to, but at any rate, First World War, Second World War, Korea, half a century of gallant peacekeeping, Chills wasn't always that peaceful. And you look at these guys, man, let's be honest about it. They were people like us, old white guys. And that's not what the present government has been trying to promote in the armed services or anywhere else, for that matter, since Mr. Trudeau came to office in 2015. It had to be about women. It had to be about minorities. It had to be about men who would be glad to find a tampon in the washroom. Not the warrior culture. It's a very, very different attitude. You see in Pete Hegseth down in the United States, Secretary of War, not everybody likes Pete Hegseth. But boy, oh boy, they put a military together that can do what's being done out there in the Iran. And if somebody gets shot down, they can go in and get them. Now, not to get too far off point here, they cannot find people who want to serve in the Canadian Armed Forces in sufficient numbers to fill the ranks. They want 70,000 people. They got about 60,000. If they really were serious about it, they would send the recruiting sergeants down to New Brunswick, which is where the basic warrior culture exists. And they say, come on, boys, for you, we'll do the old deal, and you'll receive honor, not much wages, but we'll give you the prestige of being in the Canadian Armed Forces. And you won't have to take orders from a woman, and you won't have to take orders from somebody you don't like. We're going to rebuild the army we had in 1945, and you're going to be part of it. Then they'd have their numbers. Now, that's not what they want to do. So where shall we look next? Well, according to Dr. Grock, they are looking in some of the right places. So places like Great Britain, the Netherlands, US, Five Eyes partners have got a jump on this. So if you're picturing a foreign legion that looks foreign, that may be an overstretch.
A bunch of Kiwis isn't what I had in mind.
Well, you don't knock the Kiwis, mate.
No, I know. I'm saying that's not what I imagine as a foreign legion.
Yeah. Well, that's
that just seems like getting the band back together for the Empire.
Well, that would probably work very well. If they're talking about recruiting immigrants who are already become permanent residents, so they've gone through one layer of selection, rather than directly importing large numbers of foreign nationals from Ukraine or Brazil or somewhere, and therefore, like the sort of the nightmare fantasy where you get the Somali regiment from Ottawa sent out to Suffield just in case Alberta gets restless. Probably not that likely.
Well, so far.
Let's see how many sign up. Take the King's shilling.
Yeah. So far. But they have said that they're making this a path to citizenship. There's only so many Kiwis and Australians and Brits and Yanks willing to do it. A path for citizenship. Most of the people coming in who wants it. I mean, you're a weird case. I can't really. You mess with all sorts of my arguments by sitting there, but but for the most part, I do think that this inevitably ends in the Her Majesty's Somalian Regiment in Ottawa, and His Majesty's Punjab Regiment in Calgary. That's probably where this does inevitably end, though.
Well, I got to tell you a story about one of my reporters back in the day. He came from an immigrant family, and he was so grateful for Canada taking his family in that he joined the military, became a reservist, became a tank commander, served in Bosnia, and has gone on to a highly respectful career. And he was an immigrant who wanted to give something back.
Mhm.
That may be a case in some of these new recruits. It may be a case of somebody just looking for a job. But Nigel's right. We've got to get back to making the Canadian Armed Forces a warrior culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, but having a female in command of the military does not make it a warrior culture.
Female in command of the Air Force too, by the way.
Yeah,
Well, at the very least, not this woman.
exactly.
This woman.
Yeah, I don't mean to take it as a slight against all women.
Yeah.
But
Like she's a DEI hire.
yes, exactly. We need to get the tampons out of the bathroom.
Well, out of the men's room.
out of the men's room at least.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago that Canada had a respected army worldwide, and we had one of the largest navies worldwide.
It's been pretty long.
Well, maybe the Navy.
been a
It's
while.
respected Army. Our boys did a great job in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
No question about it.
It was a small force, but it was an effective force, but it was small. But at least we had something operational. We could put a regiment in the field.
Mhm.
We couldn't even put a single regiment in the field now. Alex, my concern is, I'm sure a lot of people, they would see it as a way of giving back. This is the country that's taken me. I want to contribute to it. That is a very noble sentiment. That's fine. But the French do it with a foreign legion, and it's generally not stationed on French soil for very good reason. When they're done their time in the foreign legion, they become a citizen, and then they can go into metropolitan France. But there is the concern of loyalty. This is, it was not long ago that we had the Emergencies, or formerly War Measures Act, invoked against a peaceful Canadian protest in Ottawa and on border towns. The military itself was not used, but brutal police action was. They dragooned tow truck drivers against their will. They essentially conscripted them into service. And that was all done at the urging of Mark Carney. Justin Trudeau did it and is ultimately responsible for it. But Mark Carney was very clearly on the record in support of it, which has now been found repeatedly to be unconstitutional and abuse of power. It's not inconceivable that there could be some other kind of emergency, real or perceived. Quebec is very possibly headed towards an independence referendum. Alberta's headed very likely towards an independence referendum. I can conceive of a situation where Ottawa declares it an emergency. And I would, in the case of an emergency, I would want the soldiers that we have armed and trained to share something in common with me, that we have grown up in a similar country, that we have similar values, that we have a sense of kinship, brotherhood, that we are a part of a similar people. Because if we've armed them and we've trained them and they're being set as an adversary against us, it seems to me that they're a lot more likely to fire a whiff of grape shot into the crowd if they have very little in common with the people they're pointing the guns at.
I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that. I think that Dave's anecdote of the first generation immigrant coming to Canada and appreciating our freedoms maybe more than some of Canadians who are third or fourth generation immigrants. I think that that's fairly accurate. I think a lot of people who have been in Canada for many, many, many generations maybe take for granted the freedoms that they have. It's that old saying, you don't know what you have until it's gone. That resonates with me. I'm a first generation immigrant myself, and I would be the last person to shoot into a group of people, and because my family instilled the importance of freedom and democracy and personal rights and the right to protest and so on and so forth because they didn't have it.
No doubt, and it's not lost on me that I think the people most compliant, the most deferential to authority, the least vigorous in defense of their own freedoms, tend to be heritage Canadians, people who are descendants of old settlers. They often I think disproportionately take it for granted. And a lot of people who do sign up for this kind of thing, they're going to want to be a part of it, but they're not yet even citizens. They're not even paper one of us yet in this case, and I'm very worried about arming that kind of person and giving them an authority over everyone else.
Well, Derek, I don't think you can 100% generalize about that sort of person.
Well, I'm not 100% generalizing about anyone. I'm generalizing in the broad sense.
Here's what, to Alex's point. Alex, as we're sort of introducing you to the world here tonight, Zoltan sounds like not from around here. Where actually was your family from?
I think the moon.
They were from Hungary. They came in 1956.
Okay. Well, look. So here's the thing that we discovered during the COVID crisis is that people who came from Hungary, from Czechoslovakia, from Poland, that whole Eastern Europe cluster that had grown up under communism and had learned how to navigate through the system. You never give an opinion. You never speak to the wrong people. You keep your mouth shut. You don't talk about all of the marks of oppression. They were among the first to communicate to me, we don't like what's going on here. Mm-hmm. And so I actually, when I offered the opinion that we had less chance of the what was it I said, the first Somali dragoons or something coming out here and shooting up Alberta, I actually was saying that's less likely to happen. But the people who have come from a country where they sort of share a bit of a culture with us, but have had the bitter experience of going through communism or some system of government that has taught them how great it is to be here, where you can say what you want, at least for a year or two yet. They may well be on our side, but not everybody comes from that background. And if you've got people, I probably better not go through and name the countries, but you don't have to be a genius to think of the one.
You already named Somalia.
Well,
the question isn't the government doing it; it's whether or not the government can do it right, and that's the big problem. Yeah. Permanent residents have been serving for quite a while already. Actually, the issue right now is the volume. 20% of the latest recruits were permanent residents rather than citizens. Now, I don't like to envision a Somali unit or a Palestinian unit or even an Irish unit for that matter. If you're bringing 20% in, I would like to see it spread around then and not in.
I don't think they're actually going to do dedicated.
I understand. I don't put it beyond our woke lunatics, though, to say, for the sake of cultural, we should have the Islamic unit over here.
Well, we used to have. I guess we had Highlander units back in the day. So instead of kilts, you get turbans.
It's like immigration is good. Mass uncontrolled immigration is a problem. And this could be a good thing if they do it correctly. But that's a big F for the government in a military that is prone to incompetence and woke.
I don't trust them to do it good.
Issues. So I'm not wholly opposed to the concept of permanent residence, especially they've gone through some steps already. They're not fresh in as refugees or something and then given a firearm and put out there. But boy, just don't let it overwhelm and make sure that you're maintaining that culture again and spreading it around, instead of having actually cultural clusters that gets a little more frightening.
Could I add another? I add another point to this? So, Canada's military history is epic. Like back in time, and even not even that far back in time, if you go back to Afghanistan, that fun fact, I don't believe Canada lost a single battle or skirmish in Afghanistan. And many Taliban leaders wrote that the Canadians were the one group that they were more fearful of than any other. So this point that I'm making is not to discount Canada's military history, but I think that the need for Canadian hard power military has always been a bit overstated. I mean, we're quite blessed in the sense that we already have an amazing defense from two oceans, and our only major neighbor, the United States, is generally quite friendly to us. I think that maybe we could reframe this discussion in the sense that all of these foreign recruits who are interested in joining Canada's military offer an incredible opportunity in terms of soft power. If you look at the major threats in the world right now, China and India are becoming major threats, and the world is looking for intelligence people who speak those languages. Canada has an overabundance of them now. I agree with you, Derek, as well, that I don't necessarily trust this government to vet those people properly, but that's going to be a problem regardless of who you have working in your intelligence service. And so I think that Canada has a unique opportunity right now with the amount of immigrants that we have to kind of spin gold out of hay here and maybe become a world leader in soft power.
You may well be right. Although I would say there's another side of the coin, and it's going to be super politically incorrect to say, but say China and India, because those are two examples you mentioned, they would also see the diaspora community here as an intelligence opportunity. So I'm not casting aspersions on anyone who's here, but they will be seen as it's a double-edged sword here. They would be seen as an opportunity from those players.
Well, I mean, if they're paying them, right, they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. So if we feed them instead of the Chinese or the Indians feeding them, then they're ours now.
You know, Canadians care too much about money. People from other cultures often prize other things, and to their credit, they prize things that are more important than money. Okay, let's go. We'll go to our parting shots. Start with Nigel.
Yes, well, you had mentioned stories that didn't get a lot of attention. We at least put the story in about Canada's spaceports are now a national priority. Billions will be spent. Now, I actually do think that Canada should have a robust space program, should be able to launch its own satellites and not go to somebody else with cash. It's just that rather as we're not sure that this government knows how to get military recruitment right, I'm not sure that I would want to travel on anything contracted by this government. We have about 36 satellites in space. They've all been launched by the X. They take them up 5 at a time in one of Musk's rockets. And we're going to do better than that, from scratch. We have one rocket that's been in production for 50 years. It's the Fildebrandt. Apparently is a hell of a good rocket if all you want to do is shoot some instruments up about 200,000 feet and let them float down and take measurements. Thing's utterly reliable, but you can launch it out of your backyard. So I have a feeling that this is another pipeline proposal in the making. We're supposed to think, oh, that's great, vote for it, and give Mr. Carney the credit. I'm not.
Oh, we're going to get the gravy rocket out of this. Doug Ford is going to get a spaceship.
It's not rocket science, Nigel.
Yeah.
Apparently not.
Corey.
Should have mentioned it.
Just back into that foreign interference in diaspora populations. Imagine being a Chinese immigrant of Chinese origin, and then, we know they have been strong-arming people here with their Chinese police stations on Canadian soil and things like that, and then find out our RCMP is in partnership, and some secretive partnership, as the usual RCMP won't tell us what the details are about it. So even if you're getting pressured from the Chinese government whilst in Canada, who on earth do you call? Because the RCMP is already proudly wearing their Chinese star on their arms and won't tell you what the partnership is. Welcome to Canada.
Yeah. Dave?
Yesterday would have marked the 100th birthday of the late, great Queen Elizabeth II. Celebrations held throughout England, including at Buckingham Palace, where the royal family met people who were also turning 100, including war veterans and whatnot. So it was a day of reflection and how we missed that grand old lady.
You almost gave me a heart attack for a second because my dates weren't exact, and I thought you were memorializing another mid-April birthday.
Oh no.
Oh, this episode is
Why would that be top of mind for you, Derek?
Oh no, that's when you smoke weed. All right, Alex, you've never had one before. This is your first parting shot.
Yeah, William Major. This is a really weird court case going on in the Vancouver, BC Supreme Court. Depending on who you ask, he's either a communist spy who turncoated on Canada, or he's a great patriot who is a whistleblower now being punished by his own government. Still not exactly sure. I only sat through one day of court proceedings, and to be honest with you, I think I left with less understanding of what was going on than when I arrived.
Huh. All right. I want to give special attention to my favorite dude, Mr. Jessica Yaniv. I mentioned something about this man on last week's Pipeline. Within like an hour of putting the clip online, we got our 6th human rights complaint.
He's watching, Derek. He's watching.
That guy
So-
just doesn't give up.
I don't know who's watching right now. I know my dad does. Hi, Dad. But I don't know who else really watches. I know we've got some regulars. They're mostly here for Cory. Old ladies love Cory. But I do know that my brother in arms, one of my favorite dudes, Mr. Jessica Yaniv, is watching. So just stop sending me the human rights complaints directly. We already told you, send it to our lawyer. The Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms is defending us on this one. Our lawyer is Marty Moore. You skip the middleman. You're just sending it to me, and we all have a good laugh at your expense around the office. Just skip me, send it straight to our lawyer so we can get up to number 7. 6 human rights complaints. These are rookie numbers in this racket. We're trying to pump these numbers up. Again, I look forward to this one being replayed at my human rights trial when it comes. All right. Cory, Dave, Nigel, Alex, thank you. And subbing in for John today, we've got Josh running broadcast. He hasn't entirely screwed it up, I think. So, so good for Josh. He can go back to his job as our food critic. And thank all of you for joining us today. Go to westernstandard.news, click on subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year for unlimited access to all Western Standard content. You'll get past the paywall and support the work that we are doing here. Thank you very much, and God bless.